Hi, I'm Sarah Morgenthaler, and I'm here for the Sourcebooks Casablanca Romance Author Storytime, and I'm going to read to you from my debut novel, The Tourist Attraction, which comes out on May 5th. There was a reason he'd asked Ash to take them here specifically, and it was worth every favor he'd have to trade for the inconvenience, just to see the look on Zoe's face and hear her breath catch in her throat. Now, for the record, Graham knew far too well ice caves were dangerous. But this ice cave had been there since he was a child, and the shifting climate patterns had yet to cause any noticeable structural integrity losses this far up the glacier. There's a climbing rope. Hold on, Zoe. It was adorable how excited she was, but the idea of a medevac for a broken neck was far less exciting for Graham. But there was joy in her eyes, and no matter what else he did or didn't do, Graham was not going to be the one to take that from her. If Easton thought he was crazy for the whale watching, who knew what he'd say about this? Selfies, ice caves, letting Ash have a first row seat to his insanity? Graham would never hear the end of it. I weigh more than you, he told her, tugging on the rope to check it. Let me try it first. That's nice, but you have a better chance of pulling me out if I fall than I have of pulling you out if you fall. Plus, I'm a better climber. How do you know that? The same way I knew I was the better pool player. Tell me how you really feel. Chuckling, Graham knelt next to the stakes securing the climbing rope, gripping it securely. Okay, but try not to fall. We lose tourists every year, but you're more enjoyable than most. More enjoyable, funnier, sweeter. Basically, she was the last person who Graham wanted to lose life and limb because of an error in judgment on his part. She couldn't have been any happier. Zoe was practically bouncing with pleasure. Graham wasn't immune to the beauty of the glaciers in his home, but he couldn't take his eyes off of her. Be careful, Zoe, he added gruffly, looping the rope around his hand a second time and feeling the tension of her weight dig the heavy nylon braiding into his skin. She climbed quickly, then held the rope steady as he climbed down to join her. Graham, look, it's amazing. Over the course of his lifetime, Graham had watched a lot of strangers ooh and ah over his corner of the universe. He'd spent a significant portion of those years mentally or physically rolling his eyes. But as he stood here, watching Zoe turn in a circle, her face alive with sheer joy, it occurred to him that familiarity too often bred contempt. Surrounded by walls of ice, something inside Graham thawed, leaving him unable to keep from closing the distance between them. She caught him watching her, looking far too pretty to be with a guy like him. It wasn't the first time Graham had been off his game in this place. I lost my virginity here. Which wasn't the best conversation starter he'd ever had. What? No. Graham couldn't keep the sheepish expression from his face. It was awful. Well, I'm assuming it was awful, but on my end it was pretty amazing. All 33 seconds of it. At least you didn't have time to freeze your dangly bits. My dangly bits are made of steel. It comes with the territory of living up here. He scratched the back of his head, adding, and maybe there was one dangly bit that didn't escape unscathed. Your gangly bits have had a tough life, so they remind me regularly. When he winked at her with what he hoped was sexy roguishness, and probably more like prepubescent awkwardness, Zoe blushed again. Then she slipped her hand into his, and Graham was a goner. As they stood in the corner of an ice cave, Graham allowed himself the luxury of enjoying how much Zoe Caldwell was enjoying herself. Show me where. There. Right there? Right in that spot. Although technically it started over there. That's a lot of ground to cover, especially when you're trying not to let anything important hit the ice. Graham squeezed her fingertips in his. Zoe, how long are you here? He'd never asked anyone before. He'd never wanted or needed to know. 8 more days? This is a 2-week vacation. You leave Sunday? Sunday afternoon, she corrected him. I'm planning on making those couple hours count. 8 days wasn't enough time for anything. If Graham was the kind of guy for whom just over a week was enough, he wouldn't be standing there with the kind of woman who had no clue he couldn't stop staring at her. Zoe, if I asked you to go somewhere with me tonight after work, what would you say? Glancing at him shyly, Zoe bit her lower lip, worrying at it. Graham wanted to kiss her and steal that lip away, make it his for a while, and treat it better than she was currently doing. But 8 days just wasn't enough time. I'd say yes, but on one condition. What's that? Her eyes reflected the blue glacier ice like stars in the night sky. He was waxing poetic. It was a bad, bad sign. This time, Zoe was the one who winked, flashing him a naughty grin. You have to tell me which dangly bit. Climbs back up always sucked more than climbs down. At least Zoe had a great view. Graham went first, climbing with the competence of a man who was used to this sort of activity. When he reached the top, he whistled loudly to signal to Ash they were ready to start back. Then Graham turned and knelt by the rope ladder as Zoe followed suit. She climbed up more slowly than Graham had climbed, taking one last look around to memorize the moment. That was amazing. Unable to keep from beaming at him, Zoe accepted Graham's offered hand, getting a foot safely on the ice. Did you see? It wasn't the rope's fault that all things went to hell in a handbag. It was all the ice's fault. Or maybe it was the stake, having wriggled just loose enough in the warming surface of the glacier. Or maybe, just maybe, the glacier was as fed up as the locals were at having their home territory crisscrossed by the curious feet of exuberant tourists, because when the rope went, it took the stake and Zoe right along with it. That would teach them to not pay attention to climate change. With a squeak of surprise, Zoe slipped. She kept slipping, right off the edge of the shelf into the cave. Graham lunged for her, snagging her wrist as she went over. Dangling 20 feet above the floor of the cave, only Graham's strength keeping her from falling. "Hold on," Graham bellowed, tightening his grip on her wrist. "Ashton, get the rope. Zoe, give me your other hand." She tried to stretch, but the movement only made them both slip more. "Graham, no way." A snarl escaped his throat. "I'm not letting you go." "Actually, I was going to say, please don't let me go. I will eat every reindeer dog in Alaska until Santa's sleigh is permanently stuck on the ground if you don't let me go." A cry of fear escaped her lips as Graham's purchase gave a few inches. "Ash, move, she's slipping." Not just Zoe, they both were slipping. As terrified as she was, it occurred to Zoe maybe it would be a good thing to make Graham let her go. If someone was going to get eaten by an ice cave, it was better for her than him. He had a much better chance of getting help. At first, Zoe thought they were falling. It took a moment to realize that they were both dangling, only now he had a two-armed grip around her waist from grabbing her. Graham's face was squashed painfully into her left breast as he cursed like a sailor. "Did we die?" "Not yet, gorgeous. I'm going to hoist you up. Grab onto Ash and don't let go. If you have muscles, you use them." "I have muscles." "Prove it, Zoe, because I'm not at my best position to be tossing tourists right now." 1, 2, 3. Maybe he wasn't in his best position, but when he hit 3, Graham muscled her up past him. If he'd been cursing like a sailor up on the ice, Ash was as foul-mouthed as the sailor's disreputable uncle. Ice axe clenched between her teeth as she rewrapped the rope that now held Graham's legs secured around a new stake in the ground. Between the two of them, Zoe and Ash grabbed Graham's legs and hauled him high enough he could get the top half of his torso out of the ice cave. Graham dropped back on the ice, inhaling deeply to regain his wind. "Thanks for saving our bacon, Ash. That was exciting, wasn't it?" It took a moment for Zoe to realize that the pounding in her ears was actually her heart beating violently in her chest. "I think our versions of exciting may be a little different." Ash groaned, sitting on the ice near them. Zoe looked over and realized Graham's face was 2 shades paler than it usually was, and his hand was tight around her own. "That was brave." We have kids here. "That was brave," she whispered, rolling over and wrapping her arm around his waist. "Thank you, both of you." He hugged her tight, a much-needed comfort for both of them. Smoothing his hand over her hair, Graham looked into her eyes. "You know how life and death situations bring things into sharper clarity? I just realized something very important." "What is it?" Nose to nose, Graham panted, "I'm so glad I'm not a wuss." That's an excerpt from The Tourist Attraction. Like I said, coming out May 5th. Thank you.